A man adopts a strange German shepherd, but the moment the vet sees it, she locks down the office in panic. Within minutes, strange men show up. No one explains why. No one says what the dog really is. Something's wrong. And whatever this man brought home, it was never meant to be found. What kind of dog makes the government come knocking? Your comments and presence here remind me why I tell these stories. If you still believe in the healing strength of love, truth, and quiet courage, then you're the reason this channel exists. The winter wind howled through the Idaho mountains as Hank Redley guided his old pickup truck along the winding forest road. Thick snowflakes swirled in his headlights, making it hard to see more than 20 feet ahead. At 63 years old, Hank had driven these backwoods routes countless times, both as a forest ranger and now as a carpenter who restored old cabins. But tonight's storm was particularly nasty. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as the truck's tires crunched through the fresh snow. The heater barely kept up with the bitter cold seeping in through the truck's worn seals. Hank's full gray beard was flecked with bits of sawdust from his day's work, and his permanent squint deepened as he strained to see through the swirling white. Something dark moved at the edge of his headlights. Hank eased off the gas, peering through the windshield. There, limping along the shoulder of the road, was what looked like a German shepherd. The dog was massive, its fur matted and dirty. As Hank slowed the truck to a stop, the animal turned to look at him. Even through the snow-streaked window, those eyes caught him off guard. They were amber-colored and unnaturally alert. Well, hell, Hank muttered to himself. He hadn't had a dog since his wife, Sarah, passed over 10 years ago. Didn't want one either. But leaving an injured animal out in this weather didn't sit right with him. He cracked open the driver's door. "Hey there, boy," he called out softly. The dog's ears perked up, but it took a cautious step back. Up close, Hank could see this was no ordinary German shepherd. The animal was bigger, more wolf-like, with mottled gray and black fur. A jagged scar ran across its muzzle. "It's all right," Hank said, keeping his voice low and steady. He reached into the back seat, where he kept some beef jerky for long workdays. The dog's nose twitched at the smell, but it remained wary. Hank tossed a piece onto the snow between them. The animal approached with a strange sort of grace despite its limp. It sniffed the jerky, then looked directly at Hank. Those eyes again. They held an intelligence that made the back of Hank's neck prickle. The dog took the jerky delicately, then stood waiting, as if considering its options. "Come on then," Hank said, patting the passenger seat. "Can't leave you out here to freeze." To his surprise, the dog understood immediately. It circled around to the passenger side and waited patiently for Hank to open the door. Once inside, it settled onto the seat with unusual composure for a stray, tucking its paws underneath itself, neat as you please. The drive home was quiet, except for the howling wind and the soft whir of the heater. Every so often, Hank glanced over at his unexpected passenger. The dog sat perfectly still, watching the road ahead as if it knew exactly where they were going. Hank's cabin sat back from the main road, surrounded by towering pines. He'd built it himself after retiring from the ranger service, preferring solitude to the growing tourist crowds in town. The dog followed him inside without hesitation, its nails clicking on the hardwood floors. In the warm light of the cabin, Hank got his first good look at his new companion. Despite the dirt and whatever hardships it had faced, the animal carried itself with dignity. Its fur, though matted, showed signs of once being well kept. No collar, though, and no tags. "Let's get you cleaned up," Hank said, heading to the bathroom for some old towels. The dog followed, maintaining a polite distance. It even stepped into the tub when Hank pointed, allowing him to wash away the road grime with warm water. Through it all, those intelligent eyes watched Hank's every move. After drying off, the dog accepted a bowl of leftover stew with the same careful manners it had shown all evening. Hank sat in his worn leather armchair, watching it eat. "Guess you need a name," he said, more to himself than the dog. The animal looked up from its bowl, those amber eyes fixing on him again. "Kaiser," Hank decided, "you've got that look about you." Kaiser's tail wagged once, almost like a nod of approval. As the evening wore on, Hank found himself talking more than he had in months. There was something about Kaiser's attentive presence that made it feel natural. The dog settled near Hank's chair as he worked on some sketches for his next cabin restoration project, occasionally lifting its head when Hank would think out loud about measurement details or wood choices. "Have to get you to the vet once this storm clears," Hank said, looking out at the snow still falling heavily. "Check that leg of yours. See if you've got a chip." Kaiser's ears flattened slightly at the word vet, but otherwise remained calm. As Hank prepared for bed, the dog found a spot near the wood stove, curling up on the braided rug as if it had lived there all along. Lying in bed that night, listening to the wind rattling his windows, Hank realized his cabin didn't feel quite as empty as it usually did. Kaiser's quiet presence had somehow filled a space he hadn't even known was there. Still, those unsettling eyes and the dog's unusual behavior nagged at him. There was something different about this animal, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Just before drifting off to sleep, Hank heard Kaiser let out a soft whine from the other room. Not a sound of pain or distress, more like the dog was dreaming. Of what, Hank couldn't imagine. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't completely alone in the wilderness. The days following Kaiser's arrival brought subtle changes to Hank's quiet routine. Each morning, the wolf-like dog waited patiently by the door for their dawn walk, moving with a grace that belied his earlier injury. His limp had mostly disappeared, though Hank still noticed him favoring that leg occasionally. What struck Hank most was Kaiser's uncanny way of anticipating needs. When Hank worked in his shop, Kaiser would fetch dropped tools before being asked. During meals, he'd wait until Hank finished before approaching his own bowl. Once, when Hank had forgotten his gloves outside during a particularly cold night, Kaiser had scratched at the door until Hank followed him to where they lay buried under fresh snow. "You're something else entirely, aren't you?" Hank murmured one evening, watching Kaiser methodically arrange his toys in a perfect line by size. The dog looked up at him with those knowing amber eyes, and Hank felt that familiar shiver of unease. No normal dog showed this level of intelligence. When the snow finally cleared enough for safe travel, Hank loaded Kaiser into his truck for the drive to town. The animal seemed to sense their destination, growing increasingly tense as they approached Dr. Breyer's veterinary clinic. "It's just a checkup," Hank assured him, though he wondered why he was talking to Kaiser as if the dog could understand complex sentences. Yet Kaiser's alert posture and focused gaze made it hard to think of him as just an animal. The clinic's waiting room was empty when they entered. At the front desk, Dr. Colleen Breyer looked up from her paperwork, her usual professional smile freezing when she saw Kaiser. "Hank," she said carefully, her eyes never leaving the animal. "Where did you find this dog?" "Side of the road during that big storm last week," Hank replied. "Thought he might be a shepherd mix. Wanted to check for a chip, make sure nobody's missing him." Colleen's face had gone pale. Without a word, she stood and quickly ushered them into the nearest exam room, locking the door behind them. She drew the blinds on the windows facing the street, her movements sharp with tension. "Colleen? What's wrong?" "Hank," she said quietly, keeping her distance from Kaiser. "That's not a dog. That's a purebred wolf. Having one as a pet is a federal offense." Hank looked down at Kaiser, who sat calmly at his feet, watching them both. Now that Colleen mentioned it, the signs were obvious. The lean build, the broad head, the way his ears were set. How had he missed it? "I need to report this," Colleen said, reaching for the phone on the wall. "There are protocols." A sharp knock at the clinic's front door made them all freeze. Through the gap in the blinds, Hank glimpsed a man in dark tactical gear. Kaiser's hackles rose, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Wildlife Enforcement Division," a voice called out. "Dr. Breyer, I need to speak with you." Colleen's hand trembled as she withdrew it from the phone. "Stay here," she whispered, slipping out of the exam room. Through the door, Hank heard measured footsteps and a man's smooth, professional voice. "Agent Byron Clem. We've had reports of an unusual animal in the area. Large, wolf-like. Have you treated anything matching that description?" Something in the man's tone set off warning bells in Hank's mind. He'd worked with enough federal agents during his ranger days to know when something felt off. Kaiser pressed against his leg, the growl now silent but still vibrating through his body. "Nothing like that," Colleen answered, her voice steady despite the tremor Hank had witnessed moments before. "Just the usual pets and livestock cases. Mind if I take a look around?" "Do you have a warrant, Agent Clem?" A pause. "No warrant needed for a federal wildlife investigation, Doctor. But if you prefer, I can come back with one." The threat in those words was subtle but clear. Hank's hand found Kaiser's ruff, feeling the tension in the animal's muscles. Whatever was happening, this was more than a simple case of an illegal pet. Kaiser's unusual intelligence, this federal agent's sudden appearance, it all added up to something darker. Colleen's voice carried through the door again, professional but firm. "I'm with a patient right now, Agent Clem. If you'd like to come back with proper documentation, my office hours are posted outside." More silence then. "I'll do that, Doctor. But I should warn you, harboring an escaped federal asset is a serious offense. If you come across anything unusual, you're required to report it immediately." "Of course, Agent. I understand my obligations." Footsteps retreated, followed by the opening and closing of the clinic's front door. Seconds later, Colleen slipped back into the exam room, her face ashen. "Hank," she whispered, "what kind of trouble have you gotten yourself into?" Kaiser stood alert between them, his intelligent eyes moving from one to the other, as if following their conversation. Whatever he was, wolf, dog, or something else entirely, Hank knew one thing for certain. Agent Clem's appearance had just transformed their situation from a simple legal concern into something far more dangerous. Colleen's warning look told Hank everything he needed to know. Something was deeply wrong here. Without a word, he gripped Kaiser's collar and guided him toward the back hallway that led to the clinic's rear exit. He'd helped Colleen renovate this place years ago. He knew every door and corridor. "Stall him," Hank whispered to Colleen as he eased past her. She gave a slight nod, already moving toward the front to intercept Clem. The back hallway was dim and narrow, lined with storage closets and a small lab. Kaiser moved silently beside him, his muscles tense, but his steps sure. They reached the rear door just as Hank heard the clinic's front door chime again. Clem's voice drifted down the hallway, smooth as oil and twice as slick. Hank eased the back door open, wincing at the slight creak. The parking lot behind the clinic was empty except for his old truck. Snow had started falling again, fat flakes that would cover their tracks. Perfect. They made it to the truck without being spotted. Kaiser jumped into the passenger seat like he'd done it 100 times before. Hank started the engine and pulled out slowly, careful not to spin the tires in the fresh snow. In his rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of a dark figure emerging from the clinic's front door. His heart hammered as he turned onto the side street, fighting the urge to speed away. The drive home was tense. Hank took the long way, using the back roads he knew from his ranger days. Kaiser sat alert the whole time, his amber eyes scanning the road ahead. Every time Hank glanced in his mirrors, he expected to see a government vehicle in pursuit. In town, he spotted Clem talking to Mrs. Henderson outside the general store. The agent was showing her something, probably a photo. Mrs. Henderson pointed north, toward the road that led to Hank's cabin. His stomach churned. "Looks like we're in it now, boy," Hank muttered. Kaiser's ears twitched in response. They reached the cabin as dusk was settling in. Hank parked around back, out of sight from the road. Inside, he double-checked all the locks and drew the curtains. Kaiser paced the cabin's perimeter, nose working, before settling near the front window with his eyes fixed on the approach. Hank tried to sleep that night, but every creak of the old cabin had him reaching for the rifle he'd propped against his bedside table. Around 2 in the morning, Kaiser's growl jolted him fully awake. The wolf dog stood rigid by the window, hackles raised. Footsteps crunched in the snow outside. Multiple sets. The sound of splintering wood came from the kitchen door. Kaiser launched himself down the hallway, his snarl fierce enough to raise the hair on Hank's neck. There were shouts, a crash of breaking glass, and the thunder of retreating footsteps. By the time Hank reached the kitchen with his rifle ready, the intruders were gone. The kitchen was a mess. Drawers had been yanked open, their contents scattered. His files and papers were strewn across the floor. They'd been searching for something. Kaiser stood in the broken doorway, still growling softly. There was no blood on him. He'd scared them off without having to fight. Smart animal. "Good boy," Hank said softly. Kaiser's tail gave a single wag, but his eyes remained fixed on the darkness outside. Dawn found Hank loading essential supplies into his truck. He knew one person who might help make sense of this mess: Logan Snipe, an old friend from his ranger days who'd gone full survivalist after 3 tours in Afghanistan. Logan was paranoid as hell, but he knew things, important things. Logan's compound was 10 miles into the backcountry, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that was more suggestion than actual path. Hank had to stop twice to clear fallen branches. Kaiser remained alert the whole drive, only relaxing slightly when they pulled up to Logan's gate. The man himself appeared from behind a stand of pines, rifle casually pointed their way until he recognized Hank. Logan was built like a bear, and about as sociable as one, his gray beard wild and his eyes sharp beneath a worn camo cap. "Twice in 1 year," Logan grunted as Hank got out. "Must be the end times." "Need your help, Logan. Your kind of help." Logan's eyes narrowed as he studied Kaiser. "That ain't no dog?" "Number he's not." Hank explained everything, finding Kaiser, Clem's appearance, the break-in. Logan listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Wildlife Enforcement Division?" Logan spat. "No such thing. But I've seen operations like this before, back in the sandbox. Black Ops cleanup crew. Whatever that animal is, someone spent a lot of money making him. Now they want their investment back." Kaiser watched them both, his intelligent eyes moving between them as if following the conversation. Logan noticed. "Enhanced cognition," he muttered. "Seen programs like this, military applications. But they usually fail. Animals can't be controlled the way they want. Sometimes they escape. Then the cleanup crews come. What do I do?" Logan checked his rifle's action, a habit from his military days. "You're already doing it. You run, you hide, and you decide if this fight is worth having." Hank looked at Kaiser, remembering how the wolf dog had defended his home without hesitation. How he seemed to understand everything happening around him. How those intelligent eyes held something that went beyond mere animal instinct. "It's worth having," Hank said quietly. Logan nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. "Then let's get you prepared for what's coming." Logan's fingers flew across his laptop keyboard, the glow from the screen highlighting the deep creases in his weathered face. Hank sat beside him at the cluttered desk, while Kaiser lay alert by the door of Logan's study, which was really more of a converted storage room filled with filing cabinets and ham radio equipment. "No Byron Clem in any federal database I can access," Logan muttered, his eyes scanning page after page of search results. "Not in the Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, or any state agency records either. Man's a ghost." Hank leaned forward, studying the screen. "Could be using an alias?" "Almost certainly, but look at this." Logan pulled up a web page showing official Wildlife Division communications. All their actual bulletins follow a strict format: letterhead, reference numbers, proper channels. The papers Clem's been flashing around town, they're good forgeries, but the routing codes are wrong. How do you know all this? Logan's mouth twisted into a grim smile. Let's just say I made some interesting friends during my tours. People who taught me how to spot government paper trails and their absence. They spent the next few hours digging deeper. Logan had an impressive collection of local newspaper archives, and they found scattered reports from the past decade. Livestock disappearing in the Salmon Chalice wilderness, strange sounds in the night, unauthorized vehicles with government plates. Here's something, Logan said, pulling out a yellowed clipping. 7 years ago, a hunter reported seeing unusually large wolves near an unmarked compound. When he tried to investigate, men in tactical gear chased him off. Story got buried fast. Kaiser's ears perked up at their discussion, and Hank couldn't shake the feeling that the wolf dog understood every word. Those intelligent eyes followed their movements with an almost human awareness. Their research was interrupted by Hank's phone buzzing, a text from an unknown number. "Meet me. Urgent. CB." "Colleen Breyer," Hank said, showing Logan the message. "The vet." Logan's eyes narrowed. Could be a trap. Number I've known her 20 years. She was friends with my wife. Hank's voice softened at the mention of Sarah, gone now for 12 years. If she's reaching out, it's important. They arranged to meet Colleen at an old fire lookout tower, far enough from town to avoid attention. The winter sun was setting when they arrived, casting long shadows through the trees. Colleen was already there, pacing nervously. "I should have told you everything right away," she said as soon as they approached. Her silver-streaked braid swung as she glanced around, checking for followers. "But I was scared. Still am." From her bag, she pulled out a thick manila envelope, its edges worn. 10 years ago, I received these from a colleague, a research veterinarian who worked at a private facility in the wilderness. She sent them as insurance, said if anything happened to her, I should make them public. "What happened to her?" Hank asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Car accident. Very convenient timing." Colleen's hands shook slightly as she opened the envelope. "I never had the courage to release these, but when I saw Kaiser in my clinic, I knew. He's one of them." The documents inside told a chilling story. Project reports, lab notes, genetic sequences, all pointing to a classified program combining advanced neural enhancement with selective breeding. They were creating something new, wolves with human-level intelligence, designed for military applications. "Most of the subjects couldn't handle the modifications," Colleen explained, pointing to a page filled with clinical terminology. Their minds broke under the strain. But a few were different. They showed remarkable cognitive abilities, emotional intelligence, even problem-solving skills. Like Kaiser. Kaiser sat quietly beside Hank, his amber eyes fixed on the papers as if he recognized them. Maybe he did. "The project was shut down after some of the enhanced animals escaped," Colleen continued. "They couldn't control them. These beings they'd created were too intelligent, too independent. They formed their own social structures, their own way of thinking that the scientists couldn't predict." "And now they're cleaning up loose ends," Logan growled, "erasing evidence of their failure." Hank placed his hand on Kaiser's head, feeling the wolf dog lean into his touch. This wasn't just an animal. This was a thinking, feeling being who had chosen to trust him, to protect him. "What they did was wrong," Hank said quietly, but with steel in his voice. "Playing God, creating sentient creatures just to use them as weapons, then hunting them down when the experiment failed." "These files prove everything," Colleen said, "but Clem and his people will do anything to keep this quiet. You're both in danger." "We all are," Logan corrected. "Knowledge makes us targets now." Kaiser's ears suddenly swiveled toward the forest, his body tensing. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the lookout tower. They quickly gathered the documents, all too aware that their discovery of the truth had put them squarely in the crosshairs of people who would do anything to keep their secrets buried. Back at Logan's cabin, they spread the documents across his weathered kitchen table. Kaiser lay near the wood stove, his amber eyes following their every move as they pieced together his story. "Look at this," Logan said, holding up a page dense with scientific notation. Project Echo 7. Started as behavioral modification research on wolves, but it went way beyond that. He traced a finger down columns of data. They weren't just training wolves, they were changing them at a genetic level. Hank leaned closer, squinting at diagrams showing neural pathways and DNA sequences. "How is this even possible?" "Advanced neurological manipulation," Logan explained, his military background helping him decode the technical language. "They combined it with selective breeding and genetic engineering, created something entirely new." He glanced at Kaiser. "Something that could think like us." Kaiser's ears twitched at these words, and he lifted his head, fixing them with that unnervingly intelligent gaze. Hank felt a chill run down his spine, not from fear, but from the weight of understanding what Kaiser truly was. "Says here they were aiming for military applications," Logan continued, shuffling through more papers. "Enhanced patrol animals, reconnaissance, maybe even covert operations. But something went wrong." Hank found another document, this one marked with red stamps. "Project terminated. Security breach." The date was from 3 years ago. "They lost control, didn't they?" Logan nodded grimly. The enhanced subjects developed beyond their expectations, started showing signs of advanced reasoning, complex problem solving, even emotional intelligence. They couldn't be controlled like regular animals because they weren't regular animals anymore. He paused, looking at Kaiser. They were something more. "That's why Clem is really here," Hank said quietly. "He's not wildlife enforcement. He's cleaning up their mess." A sudden crash from outside made them both jump. Kaiser was on his feet instantly, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Logan reached for the rifle mounted above his fireplace, but before he could grab it, the kitchen window exploded inward. A canister bounced across the floor, spewing thick smoke. Logan shouted, "Back door!" But another crash came from that direction. They were surrounded. Kaiser launched into action, moving with incredible speed and purpose. He knocked Hank aside just as a dark figure burst through the front door, saving him from what looked like a tranquilizer dart. The wolfdog's tactics weren't just aggressive, they were strategic, herding Hank and Logan toward the cellar entrance while keeping the intruders at bay. In the chaos, Logan took a hit, not from a tranquilizer, but from a real bullet that grazed his shoulder. He stumbled, cursing, but managed to return fire with his backup pistol. The attackers retreated temporarily, giving them precious seconds. "Down here!" Logan grunted, pulling open the cellar door. They scrambled down the steep stairs, Kaiser bringing up the rear like a trained guard. The wolfdog's behavior was a stunning display of his enhanced capabilities. He wasn't just fighting on instinct. He was protecting them with tactical precision. In the cellar, Logan pressed a hidden panel, revealing a narrow tunnel. "Old bootlegger's passage," he explained through gritted teeth, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Leads to a cave system. We can lose them there." They could hear heavy boots on the floor above as they hurried through the tunnel, flashlight beams barely cutting through the darkness. Kaiser stayed close, occasionally touching Hank's hand with his nose, as if reassuring him. When they finally emerged in a small cave a quarter-mile away, Logan slumped against the rock wall. Blood had soaked through his shirt. "Just a graze," he insisted, but his face was pale in the dim light filtering through the cave mouth. Hank quickly tore strips from his own shirt to bind the wound. "Those weren't wildlife agents," he said. "That was a professional hit team." "Black Ops," Logan agreed, wincing as Hank tightened the makeshift bandage. "They're not trying to capture Kaiser anymore. They're trying to eliminate everyone who knows about him." Kaiser sat alert at the cave entrance, his enhanced senses scanning for pursuit. The attack had proven everything they'd learned about him: his intelligence, his loyalty, and the lengths to which certain people would go to keep his existence secret. "We can't go back to either of our places," Hank said, checking Logan's bandage one more time. "They'll be watching." Logan nodded, his breathing steadier now. "I've got a backup location. Remote hunting cabin about 20 miles north. If we can make it there, we can regroup, figure out our next move." Kaiser's ears suddenly perked up, and he turned to look deeper into the cave system. They could hear it too now. Distant voices echoing through the tunnels. Their pursuers had found the passage. "They're not giving up easily," Logan muttered, struggling to his feet. "Whatever Kaiser represents, they're desperate to keep it buried." Hank looked at the wolf dog who had saved their lives twice now. Kaiser met his gaze, and in those amber eyes, Hank saw not just intelligence, but understanding and determination. Whatever happened next, they were in this together. The old ranger station creaked in the mountain wind. Hank had restored it years ago, replacing rotted boards and fixing the leaky roof, never imagining it would become their hideout. Through the dusty windows, Colleen watched the valley below while typing frantically on her laptop. "I can't believe I almost called this in," she said, shaking her head. "If I hadn't seen that look in Clem's eyes." She shuddered, remembering his cold stare when he'd cornered her at the clinic. The threats he made weren't just about following protocol. He wanted Kaiser dead, and anyone who'd seen him. Hank nodded, stoking the wood stove. Kaiser lay near the heat, alert as always. "You made the right choice, Colleen. Whatever's going on here, it's bigger than wildlife regulations." Colleen's laptop chimed. "Finally, my old research contact came through." She opened a heavily encrypted file, her face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. "These are security feeds from the original facility. They're dated 3 years ago." Hank pulled up a chair beside her. The first video showed sterile laboratory rooms with rows of cages. Men in white coats moved between them, taking notes. In one cage, a wolf paced, its movements eerily similar to Kaiser's. "Wait," Colleen said, pausing the frame. "Look at the marking on its leg." A distinctive white patch, shaped like a crescent moon. Kaiser lifted his head, and they both looked at the identical mark on his flank. "That's him," Hank whispered. "That's Kaiser." They watched more footage, scientists conducting tests, measuring responses, documenting the wolves' increasing intelligence. But then the tone changed. New personnel arrived, military types. The testing became harsh, pushing boundaries. In one clip, a wolf was denied food for refusing to complete a tactical exercise. "Stop!" Hank said suddenly. "Go back!" Colleen rewound the footage. There in the background stood a younger Byron Clem. He wore a different uniform then, but his cold eyes were unmistakable. He was supervising what they called containment protocols. The next clips made them both sick. When some wolves showed signs of resistance or failed to perform as expected, Clem gave the order. The footage showed him personally executing several animals, his expression never changing. "Those weren't mercy killings," Colleen said, her voice shaking. "That was elimination of evidence. They were covering their tracks even then." More files revealed the project's true scope. The enhanced wolves weren't just meant for military applications. They were proof of concept for something larger: neural manipulation, genetic acceleration, behavioral conditioning, all leading toward human applications. That's why they can't let Kaiser live, Hank realized. He's proof that the program worked, but also that it went wrong. These wolves developed beyond their control. They became too intelligent, too independent. Colleen nodded, copying the files to a secure drive. And now we have proof. Video evidence of illegal experimentation, unauthorized genetic manipulation, cruel testing practices. She looked at Kaiser, who had moved closer, as if understanding. And proof of Clem's direct involvement in the cover-up. "We need to get this out," Hank said, Multiple channels so they can't suppress it. Already on it, Colleen replied. I'm sending encrypted copies to trusted journalists, animal rights organizations, and ethical research oversight committees. Once this breaks, they won't be able to… A sharp crack echoed outside. Kaiser's head snapped toward the window, ears forward. Hank quickly doused the lantern, plunging them into darkness except for the laptop's glow. How did they find us? Colleen whispered, frantically finishing the file transfers. Doesn't matter, Hank said, grabbing their go-bags. We need to move. Now. Kaiser was already at the back door, his enhanced senses tracking something they couldn't perceive. The evidence was secured, copied to multiple locations. Now they just had to survive long enough for the truth to come out. They slipped out into the mountain night, Kaiser leading the way. Behind them, flashlight beams began sweeping the ranger station's windows, but they had what they needed now. Proof of everything. The question was whether they could stay alive long enough to make sure the world saw it. The wind howled through the mountain peaks as dark clouds rolled in, bringing the first heavy flakes of snow. Inside the ranger station, Hank watched through binoculars as 3 black vehicles wound their way up the access road, their headlights cutting through the growing storm. They're here, he said grimly, lowering the binoculars. 3 teams, at least. Colleen continued typing, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The upload's at 60%. We need another 20 minutes minimum. Logan sat propped against the wall, his bandaged shoulder a stark reminder of their last encounter with Clem's men. Better make it quick. That storm's going to knock out the satellite connection soon. Hank moved with purpose, drawing on decades of forestry experience. He'd maintained this station for years, knew every creaky board and loose nail. Now those details would help keep them alive. Kaiser, guard, he commanded. The wolf took position by the door, his enhanced senses already tracking movement outside. Working methodically, Hank reinforced the windows with pre-cut plywood sheets. He'd staged them weeks ago, along with other supplies, never thinking he'd actually need them. At strategic points around the cabin's perimeter, he'd buried trip lines connected to flashbang deterrents, old ranger tricks for scaring off aggressive wildlife, now repurposed for human predators. Logan, can you still handle the drone detector? Hank asked, securing the last window. Logan patted the modified radio equipment beside him. Just point me at the sky. First sign of electronic interference, we'll know they're watching. The wind grew stronger, rattling the reinforced windows. Snow was falling heavily now, reducing visibility to mere yards. Perfect cover for both sides. A high-pitched whine cut through the storm's roar. Logan's equipment lit up like a Christmas tree. Drone! He shouted. Northwest quadrant! Hank grabbed the modified flare gun they'd prepared. Through the swirling snow, he caught a glimpse of red running lights. The drone was searching for heat signatures, trying to confirm their location. Now! Logan called, reading the drone's flight pattern. Hank fired. The flare arced through the darkness, its magnesium charge detonating near the drone. The electromagnetic pulse did its work. The drone spiraled down, smoking into a snowbank. That'll slow down their surveillance, Logan said with grim satisfaction. But they'll have more. Colleen looked up from her laptop, face tense. 75% uploaded. The storm's interfering with the connection. A metallic click echoed from the front door, someone testing the lock. Kaiser growled, low and dangerous. Through the storm's fury, they could hear multiple footsteps crunching in the snow, circling the cabin. They're testing our defenses, Hank whispered, moving to his pre-selected firing position. Get ready. This is just the beginning. The first attempt to breach the door triggered one of Hank's traps, a thunderous blast that sent the attackers scrambling for cover, but they all knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Somewhere out there in the storm, Clem was orchestrating a methodical siege. And time was running out. The blizzard intensified, turning the world outside into a white void. Inside the ranger station, the temperature dropped as bitter drafts sneaked through every crack. Hank's breath came out in visible puffs as he crouched near the reinforced door, rifle ready. A tremendous crash shattered the tense silence as the door burst inward, hinges screaming. Through the swirling snow, Clem's dark figure emerged, flanked by two men in tactical gear. Their weapons swept the room methodically. "Down!" Hank shouted, diving behind an overturned table as bullets splintered the wood around him. Colleen scrambled for cover behind a filing cabinet, her laptop clutched protectively against her chest. The upload was still incomplete, their only chance to expose the truth. Kaiser launched himself at the nearest attacker, a blur of gray and black fur. The man screamed as powerful jaws clamped onto his arm, forcing him to drop his weapon. The wolf's enhanced strength was terrifying to witness. This was what the experiments had created. "Take the animal down," Clem ordered, his voice cold and mechanical. He fired at Kaiser, but the wolf's unnatural reflexes allowed him to dodge, releasing his grip on the wounded man. Hank used the distraction to tackle the second gunman. They crashed into a shelf of old forestry equipment, sending metal tools clattering across the floor. The man was younger, stronger, but Hank's decades of wilderness experience had taught him how to fight dirty. He drove his knee up, then slammed an elbow into the man's throat. A sharp cry from Colleen drew his attention. Clem had her cornered, his weapon trained on her head. "The files," he demanded. "Delete them now or—" Kaiser's growl cut through the chaos. The wolf positioned himself between Clem and Colleen, hackles raised, amber eyes blazing with an intelligence that was undeniably human. In that moment, Hank saw what the scientists had tried to create. Not just a weapon, but a being capable of moral choice. "Call off your pet, Redley," Clem said, his pale eyes never leaving Kaiser. "This ends now. You have no idea what's at stake." "I know exactly what's at stake," Hank replied, inching toward the modified snare trap he'd prepared. "You're trying to bury your mistakes. But Kaiser isn't a mistake. He's proof of what happens when you play God." The first attacker, arm bleeding, tried to flank Kaiser. The wolf reacted instantly, spinning to face the new threat. Clem used the opening to fire at Colleen. Time seemed to slow. Kaiser somehow sensed the danger and lunged, taking the bullet in his shoulder. The wolf yelped but stayed standing, blood matting his thick fur. Something snapped in Hank. All the loneliness, all the years of isolation since losing his wife, it crystallized into pure rage. He yanked the hidden cord, triggering the snare trap. Steel cables whipped across the room, catching Clem's legs. The agent crashed down, his weapon skittering across the floor. The wounded attacker raised his backup pistol, but Kaiser was faster. Despite his injury, the wolf struck like lightning, powerful jaws closing on the man's hand. Bones crunched. The pistol fell. The second man Hank had fought stirred, reaching for a knife. Hank kicked it away and delivered a final knockout blow. "Stay down," he growled. Clem struggled against the cables, reaching for a concealed weapon. Kaiser released the first attacker and stalked toward the fallen agent. Blood dripped from the wolf's fur, but his steps were steady, purposeful. "You're just an experiment," Clem spat at Kaiser. "A failed prototype. Nothing more." Kaiser's reply was a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. He placed one massive paw on Clem's chest, pinning him down. The message was clear. The wolf could end this with one bite, but he was choosing not to. "He's more than your experiment," Hank said, checking the upload progress on Colleen's laptop. 98%. "He's family, and he just proved he's more human than you'll ever be." Colleen quickly bound the unconscious attackers with zip ties while Hank secured Clem. Outside, the blizzard began to ease, revealing the first hints of dawn. Kaiser limped to Hank's side and pressed against his leg, leaving a bloody smear on his jeans. "Good boy," Hank whispered, his hand finding the wolf's thick fur. You did good." The words felt inadequate for what Kaiser had done. Not just fighting, but choosing to protect rather than kill. The scientists had tried to create the perfect weapon, but instead they'd created something far more valuable, a being capable of love and sacrifice. The morning after the fight, Hank sat at his kitchen table, holding an ice pack to his bruised ribs. Kaiser lay at his feet, his shoulder bandaged by Colleen's careful hands. The wolf's amber eyes followed every movement as Logan worked on multiple laptops, sending the damning footage to every major news outlet in the country. "It's done," Logan announced, his fingers hovering over the final key. "Once I hit send, there's no going back. You sure about this, Hank?" Hank looked down at Kaiser, who lifted his head and met his gaze with that uncanny intelligence. "Do it," he said firmly. "The world needs to know." With a single keystroke, Logan released everything: the video footage, the research files, the documentation of illegal experiments. Within hours, the story exploded across social media and news channels. Phones started ringing non-stop. Reporters descended on the small Idaho town like locusts. Colleen watched the coverage from Hank's worn leather couch, her face pale but determined. "They're calling it the biggest government scandal since Watergate," she said. "Look, they're already launching congressional investigations." The footage was devastating. Scenes of wolves being subjected to neural enhancement procedures, genetic manipulation, and behavioral conditioning. The faces of the scientists, including Clem, were clearly visible. The public's outrage was immediate and fierce. "Any sign of Clem?" Hank asked Logan, who was monitoring police channels. Logan shook his head. "Nothing. After we tied him up, he just vanished during transport. My contacts say either he didn't survive his injuries, or more likely his handlers cleaned house. Men like him, they're ghosts. They disappear when the mission fails." Kaiser whined softly, pressing closer to Hank's leg. Despite his injury, the wolf remained alert, as if sensing their conversation's gravity. Hank scratched behind his ears, feeling the coarse fur beneath his fingers. "It's not over," Colleen warned, setting down her phone. "I just got word from my research contacts. The government's shifting strategies. They're not denying the experiments anymore. They're claiming oversight and regulation. They want to study the successful subjects under controlled conditions." Hank's heart sank. He knew what that meant. They would come for Kaiser, wrap it in legitimate-sounding paperwork, but the end result would be the same. More tests, more cages, more pain. "They can't have him," Hank growled, his voice rough with emotion. Logan cleared his throat. "There might be a way," he said carefully. "I know people, good people, who run a sanctuary, way up in the Canadian wilderness, completely off the grid. No government oversight, no paperwork, just thousands of acres of protected land." The weight of what Logan was suggesting settled over the room. Kaiser lifted his head, those intelligent eyes moving between the humans, understanding far more than any normal wolf should. Hank's chest tightened. The thought of letting Kaiser go felt like losing a limb. In the months since finding him on that snowy road, the wolf had become more than a pet. He had become family, filling a void Hank hadn't even realized was there. "How soon?" Hank asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Tonight," Logan replied, "before they can organize a legal response. I've got a trusted pilot standing by." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Colleen checked Kaiser's wounds one last time and packed medical supplies. Logan arranged the transport and cleared the flight path. And Hank just sat with Kaiser, memorizing every detail of his face, his fur, the way his eyes seemed to hold entire conversations. As sunset approached, they drove to a small private airstrip. The pilot, an older woman with kind eyes, waited beside a bush plane. She didn't ask questions. She'd done this kind of rescue before. In the fading light, Hank knelt beside Kaiser. The wolf sat perfectly still, his presence steady and strong despite everything they'd been through. "You've got to go now, boy," Hank said, his voice breaking. "You'll be safe there. free. He wrapped his arms around Kaiser's thick neck, feeling the powerful heartbeat against his chest. "You saved more than just yourself, you know. You saved me too." Kaiser pressed his forehead against Hank's shoulder, a gesture so human it brought tears to the old carpenter's eyes. Then, with a final look that seemed to contain all the wisdom and sorrow in the world, Kaiser turned and walked steadily toward the waiting plane. Hank watched until the small aircraft disappeared into the darkening sky, taking with it the most extraordinary being he'd ever known. The empty space beside him felt vast and cold, but somehow different from the loneliness he'd known before. This absence had purpose. This sacrifice had meaning. "He'll be okay," Colleen said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing." Hank nodded, unable to speak. In the distance, a wolf howled, a normal wolf, with normal wolf concerns. But for a moment, Hank let himself imagine it was Kaiser, already finding his place in the wild, finally free to be exactly what he was. Neither experiment nor pet, but something altogether more remarkable. 6 months had passed since that night at the airstrip. Spring had melted into summer, and now autumn painted the Idaho wilderness in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Hank Redley stood on the newly built deck of his latest project, Kaiser's Den, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded him of a certain wolf's intelligent amber eyes. The cabin was his finest work yet. Sturdy logs carefully fitted together, a wraparound porch perfect for quiet contemplation, and large windows that brought the outside in. It wasn't just another restoration job. This was something new, something with purpose. Inside, James Mitchell, a former Marine who'd struggled to find his footing after 3 tours in Afghanistan, was settling in. He was the first recipient of what Hank now called the Kaiser Project, providing off-grid homes for veterans who needed space to heal. "Still can't believe this is real," James said, joining Hank on the deck. His cane made a soft thump against the wooden planks. "When the VA counselor told me about your program, I thought it was too good to be true." Hank smiled, his weathered face creasing with warmth. "Sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them, like finding a wolf in a snowstorm." James nodded, familiar with the story that had made national headlines. The exposure of the government's illegal animal testing program had led to sweeping reforms and investigations. More importantly, it had given Hank a new mission. "Logan called earlier," Hank said, thinking of his friend who'd become an integral part of the project. "He's finished vetting the next 2 candidates, both Army Rangers. One lost her leg in Syria, the other's dealing with PTSD. Good people who just need a quiet place to find themselves again." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the clearing. Colleen's truck appeared on the winding dirt road, right on schedule for her weekly visit. Since the incident, she'd expanded her practice to include mental health support for veterans, working closely with Hank's project. "Evening, boys," she called out, climbing the steps with her medical bag. "How's the shoulder today, James?" While Colleen checked on James, Hank walked to the edge of the clearing. The trees were beginning to shed their leaves, creating a carpet of red and gold that crunched beneath his boots. He thought about how much had changed since last winter. The nightmares about the siege at the ranger station had faded. The guilt over letting Kaiser go had transformed into something else. A quiet pride in knowing he'd done right by his friend. The loneliness that had once consumed him had been replaced by purpose, by the satisfaction of helping others find their way back from their own dark places. 3 more cabins were under construction deeper in the valley. Logan had helped design the security systems, nothing obvious, just enough to ensure the veterans could feel safe while they healed. Colleen had convinced several of her colleagues to provide pro bono medical care. The project was growing, touching more lives than Hank had ever imagined possible. The setting sun cast its final rays through the trees when he heard it, a long, haunting howl from somewhere in the distance. James and Colleen fell silent on the deck, listening. It was just a regular wolf, Hank knew, one of many that roamed these mountains. But it stirred something in his heart, nonetheless. He smiled, not with the ache of loss that had once accompanied thoughts of Kaiser, but with the quiet triumph of knowing that somewhere, far to the north, a remarkable wolf was running free. The evidence they'd exposed had ensured no more animals would suffer in secret laboratories. Kaiser's legacy lived on in every veteran who found peace in these mountains, in every cabin built with care and understanding. "Beautiful sound," James commented as Hank rejoined them on the deck. "That it is," Hank agreed, settling into one of the handcrafted chairs he'd made for the porch. "Reminds us that sometimes the wild things know best. Sometimes letting go is the greatest victory of all." The stars were beginning to appear, bright points of light in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring more work. Lumber to cut, foundations to lay, lives to help rebuild. But for now, Hank sat with his friends, listening to the wind in the trees and the occasional call of a distant wolf, feeling at peace with the choices that had brought him here. In the end, Kaiser had given him far more than companionship. He'd given him back his purpose, his connection to others, and most importantly, his faith in doing what was right, no matter the cost. As another howl echoed through the valley, Hank closed his eyes and smiled, knowing that some bonds transcend distance, some victories echo forever in the heart. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.